There's something incredible in the Parsha, and it's not what you think.
What is it?
If you ask any person, even a kid, when and where the Luchot were given to Am Yisrael, they'd probably tell you on Har Sinai on Shavuot. But actually, nothing was really given on Har Sinai in Shavuot. The first Luchot were given to Moshe Rabbeinu right before he came down the mountain in our Parsha, which is 40 days after Matan Torah, which is 40 days after Shavuot, and Moshe Rabbeinu breaks them. The Luchot that we actually had in the Aron Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim were given to Moshe Rabbeinu a lot later on Yom Kippur. And Moshe himself actually made those Luchot, went up with them to Shemayim, and then brought them back down with him. So how did this happen? Why do we usually collectively remember the great Matan Torah on Shavuot and Har Sinai, even though it wasn't a successful Matan Torah, even though those Luchot ended up breaking? Why is that so? Why were the Luchot that actually lasted, that were put in the Aron HaBrit in Kodesh HaKadoshim, why were they given in such a different way than the Matan Torah that happened on Shavuot?
Well, I think the reason we collectively remember the great Matan Torah as the first Matan Torah, because first of all, as humans, we are attracted to the drama. It's dramatic. There's the noise, the sound, and light show. That's Matan Torah. And the other reason is, as you were saying, we don't celebrate the day when we got the first Luchot, which is Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. We celebrate the moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was willing to give us, that we were prepared to receive Torah. But it's true, as you're saying, even when we look at our Parsha, at the moment of the Luchot coming down, it's all hidden, as opposed to the first Luchot when everyone's standing around and some go up with Moshe part way. Here, when Moshe goes up, V'ish lo ya'alei imach, nobody should go with you. Ish lo yira b'chol ha'ar, nobody should be seen there. And when Moshe comes down, he writes the Luchot, and the pasuk doesn't even give one pasuk to say, and Moshe came down with the Luchot. It says, and when Moshe came down with the Luchot, his face was shining. That's it. And the Midrash Tanchuma actually looks at this difference and says something fascinating. It says that the Luchot Rishonim, the first Luchot that were given bepumbi, were given in public, that were given, as we know, with all the drama around it, Shalta b'hem ayin hara v'nishtabu. They were so-called influenced by ayin hara and ended up breaking. Versus the second Luchot that were given betzin'ah, without all the drama, quietly, where we can barely find that pasuk to even hold on to, those lasted for generations. And you know what? I think we could even say that it's not only that the moment of giving over the second Luchot wasn't so dramatic, it also wasn't a moment. It was something continuous. Maybe it's continuous until this moment, as opposed to this Luchot Rishonim, where we have this one dramatic moment of receiving the Torah. Here, we have a slow process. It's less exciting. It's less dramatic. We may not remember it as well and celebrate it because it isn't one moment. It's every moment. It's every day. It's continuous. It's a process. And I think what the Midrash and what the Torah is teaching us here is a very important message. We tend to glorify, to get excited about these dramatic, uplifting moments. Those are the ones that we look up to, that we wish we were there. But the reality is that the real things, the long-term things, the things that last for eternity, are built quietly, are built without the drama, are built not by coincidence without the drama. They're built successfully and long-term because they don't have the drama, because they don't have the ayin hara, as the Midrash says. The ayin hara means that everyone's looking and saying, what's going to be with that? How's that going to end up? When things are quiet, as we know, ein habracha shora ela bedavar samui min ayin. The bracha rests only in what is covered from the eye. If we really want to achieve something long-term, something meaningful, the way to do it is not Luchot Rishonim. The way to do it is Luchot Shneim. The way to do it is every day, step after step, as a process, and not as one dramatic moment, which as high the peak was, spiritually, that's how low it ended up with Chet HaEgel and the broken Luchot.
Right, exactly like you're saying, and we've discussed this in the past, that sometimes we're drawn more towards the shiny stuff, and we're drawn to the grandiose stories, we're drawn to the pyrotechnics of Har Sinai, of the lightnings and the thunder and the noise and the smoke. But the fact of the matter is that the great things aren't really created in one night and aren't really created in public in these great shows. Rather, the great big things are built in that long grind, in that perseverance, in that persistence, in the day after day, the hard work. That's how you create these long lasting things. And as we can see it in the Midrash, like you said, the difference difference between the Luchot Rishonim and the Luchot Shneim. The Luchot Shneim that were given quietly and even till today are still being developed. As we discussed back in Parsha's Vezot HaBracha, the idea of having the Luchot Shneim means that the Torah Sheba'al Peh nitna also with the Luchot Shneim. The Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Torah that develops with us through the generations, was given already with the second Luchot. Actually, looking at the Parsha, there's another point that is usually looked over because Chet HaHegel takes the majority of the attention. We kind of run through those psukim of the breaking of the Luchos, and you have to stop and think about it for a second. Like, what actually happened there when the Luchot broke? As you know from the Midrash, the entire world was waiting for Matan Torah. The Torah came before the world. The whole world was waiting for the Torah to be given. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Shemayim and he smashes these Luchot. He shatters these Luchot down to the ground. And you have to stop and say to yourself, hold on, what just happened here? We know that on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, that's one of the reasons we fast on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, because of that terrible occasion, because of that terrible thing that happened with the Luchot breaking. But do we actually understand what it actually meant that those Luchot were broken? We have to take a second and stop and think for a second. What did he actually meant that those Luchot were thrown to the ground by Moshe? What was the feeling in Am Yisrael? And like we mentioned in the past, Am Yisrael didn't know they were going to get other Luchos after this. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know he was going to bring other Luchos after this. But at that moment, after the entire world was waiting for so many generations for the Torah, to have it lost like that in that second had its effect too. And the whole idea that we have Luchot v'Shivrei Luchot Munachim Ba'aron, the whole idea that we have them both still with us represents the idea that we have the full Luchot that we got on Har Sinai, but we also have the Luchot that we have to rebuild, that we have to build together, that we have to continue building until today, that we have to continue adding to, and we have to make and take ownership on it, like we discussed in the past. And maybe the whole idea behind Matan Torah and when Matan Torah actually happened is the thought that using that psychology that sometimes we only appreciate things after they're gone. We only recognize what we have and we only appreciate the value of what we had only after we missed them, only after they're gone. And maybe this is part of the puzzle that was missing out of Matan Torah. And in order to receive the Torah and make the Torah really ours, we had to go through that process of getting the Torah, losing it, and then getting it again, and getting the concept and idea of rebuilding it ourselves and putting ourselves into the Torah throughout the generations. And maybe we can even say that the moment of Matan Torah was the moment that the Luchot broke, was the moment that Am Yisrael understood that they don't have it, that even though the entire world was waiting for it, even though the entire Yetziat Mitzrayim was for the Torah, and suddenly they didn't have it, that was the moment that they internalized Matan Torah, that they understood that the Torah is theirs and it's up to them to continue building it. And again, maybe that's the feeling that they needed to have in order to continue building the Torah. And throughout the entire generations, as we know the history of our nation, what things we went through, the yearning that was born with the Luchot breaking, with the desire to get a second Luchos, is what drove Am Yisrael throughout all the generations, is what drives us until today to continue building the Torah, to continue building a nation, Mitzvah Hashem, until Mashiach will come.
Beautiful, but there's something that's still bothering me with the Midrash. Why give Luchot Rishonim the wrong way in the first place? Let's just go to Luchot Shneim from day one. Why did we have to go through that experience? And we know this concept appears many times. We have Adam Arishon in Gan Eden and then getting kicked out and going through a slow process to build up from there. We even know the concept of a child, of a baby before it's born, learning all of Torah, then forgetting it all and starting the process again. Why do we need those initial moments? And I think a good way to understand this is the other day one of my kids wanted to blow up a balloon and they kept trying to blow up the balloon and it wouldn't go. And they came to me, and what was the first thing I did? I stretched the balloon, let go, and then started blowing it up. Now, why did I stretch the balloon? Meaning I stretched it and it went back down to being small. But that moment of stretching it as far as it could, even though it didn't last, even though it was just for a split second, that moment gave the balloon the ability to begin that slow process of filling up and refilling. Once we've been there, once we've touched that glory, even though it can't last and it won't last, that gives us both the belief in ourselves that we could be there and sort of stretches our neshamas to where we could be, so now we can begin that process of reaching there. The first Luchot is HaKadosh Baruch Hu stretching us. It wasn't a process, it just happened. And the second Luchos is us filling up slowly. Maybe that's why in the first Luchot, the Luchot shine. Moshe Rabbeinu comes with Luchot that shine. In the second Luchot, Moshe is the one that shines, because the first Luchot is HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us something that shines, stretching us. And the second is about us shining, is about us going through that gradual process without the drama and slowly reaching that high goal that, as you said, we are still climbing and still achieving.
Beautiful, wonderful. And as I mentioned, we've discussed a lot about Luchot Rishonim and Shneim back in Parsha's Vezot HaBracha. I'm going to link it up over here in this video. And Mitzvah Hashem, we'll talk again. again next week.
Goyech, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach to you and good Shabbos.
More Talking Torah videos on different topics. Check out our YouTube channel.